Y ahora pues tenemos una sesión en que una serie de ponentes van a ir explicando sistemas que se utilizan para la creación y que luego van a estar un poco en las mesas de fuera demostrándolos para funcionar. Como han venido desde muy lejos y les queremos agradecer el esfuerzo, a partir de ahora ellos presentarán en inglés y yo les voy a presentar en inglés también. So, welcome, thank you very much for coming. The first speaker will be Simon Colton. Simon is Professor of Computational Creativity at Queen Mary currently, as well as a few other things in other places. He's a very active person, and he'll be talking about, he's done a lot of work. He started with writing programs that were creative in mathematics, and then he's done work on painting. He did try dabbling with music and is probably still working on it, but we haven't heard about it. And then he's moved on, and he's now famous in the computational creativity world for his work on video games and programs that write video games on their own. So I'll let him present his work.
Thanks a lot. Buenos días, y lo siento. Mi esposa y mi hija son español, pero no hablo español. So it will be in English, of course. Maybe when we celebrate 100 years of computer-assisted creativity at Conferencia, I'll be able to speak in Spanish. I wanted to talk today about the Painting Full project. As Pablo mentioned, I've been involved in lots of different application domains, and video games is a big one, and I'll come to that at the end. But the Painting Full project is, I think, a little bit more associated with what has been going on here in Complutense. And it's been very much influenced by the work of Complutense. Everybody in AI and art has been influenced by the projects done over the years here. But me in particular, I've known Pablo for 20 years now, I think, roughly. And we've had projects together, and I've been strongly influenced by the conversations and the projects we've had together. So I will be talking about the past, present, and future, and starting with the past. The Painting Full project's been going for about 17 years. And there is a stated aim to the project, which is that I want to build a system which is one day taken seriously as a creative artist in its own right. So there's lots of computer-assisted creativity for people, and that's very much part of our field of computational creativity. And the far end of the spectrum, there's autonomous creativity, and that's always been a driving force for me. And I really want the Painting Full to carry on and maybe give a presentation in 50 years' time. I'll be long dead, but it will carry on, and no one will notice that I'm not around, because it's the artist, and it carries on doing things in interesting ways, and doesn't need me as a programmer anymore. So the project obviously involved graphics, natural language processing, artificial intelligence, and machine vision. I tend to focus on the cognitive aspects of the painting process rather than the physical aspects. The graphics community simulate painting processes at the kind of physics level and the brushstroke level. I'm far more interested in what it means for software to conceive a painting and carry it out, rather than just simulating the physics of the paint. So you can't see it down here, but I'll be covering in 1 minute each 10 projects from the Painting Full. And the first one here was the first commission that I had with the Painting Full, which was by my department at Imperial, when I was back at Imperial. That was on the wall in the department for about 7 years. It was one of the first times I used evolutionary art, which I think you're going to hear from Pnuzel a bit more about. And I basically just evolved the positions of the flowers. But I realized if I evolved it all the way to as best it could be, fitness value 1, then it looked very clinical. So I actually rolled it back. So it was nice to use AI systems and not try and optimize something which is very much part of the discourse. So that's the first project. Second picture I wanted to show you is this. This is a portrait of me done, I think, in about 2006, 2007. And it really was that miserable when the painting was taken, because it was for a competition run by the British Computer Society. The competition was in Cambridge and I was in London, and it was like 4 hours away, and it was 2 a.m. in the morning, and the software wasn't really working. So it really was that miserable. But the software was able, back then, it was able to tell which emotion I was expressing by using machine vision to categorize my emotion into one of 6 categories, and then choose its painting process accordingly. So it chose muted colors, a pastel style, and hopefully enhanced the misery that I was showing with its painting style. And that was the first time I kind of showed that the software can appreciate what's going on. We won the prize. This was a British competition, British computer science competition, and we were interviewed by a few journalists. The guy there, which you perhaps can see, pulling a face, he was the science editor for a newspaper. He came along and he pulled a face. The software realized that he was showing disgust and chose to paint him in this kind of monk style, like the Scream, stretch face, kind of grayed out colors to try and emphasize the disgust on his face. And the software was able to paint anger, fear, disgust, surprise, happiness, and sadness accordingly. And the painting there was my Facebook profile picture for many years. So that's the second project. The third project, I started using other AI techniques, including evolutionary processes, and good old-fashioned AI techniques, including constraint solving. So if you know your AI, constraint solving isn't normally used in kind of artistic projects, but I built this system with which you could drag around some rectangles on a screen. The software would infer a pattern in those rectangles, and it would express that pattern as a constraint satisfaction problem, and then you could run the CSP and generate more things. So I could generate ad nauseum, really, images in this series. You might not be able to see it, but it's called the President series, because I managed to get the faces of American presidents, Democrats, I should point out, in the tree faces. And I used a pun on the Ents from the tree people from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And so you might be able to just see Obama there, hope for peace. And I love the fact that I was using constraint satisfaction there. The perspective you get from the flowers going off into the distance and the placement of the trees and their orientation was all done by CSPs based on me dragging a few rectangles around. The fourth project was a master's project that I supervised by Anna Czechkovska, and she cobbled together a hybrid system where the painting fool was part of it. Every morning her software would wake up and read the Guardian newspaper and find the headline newspaper story, extract all of the key phrases from it, use those key phrases to go off to image repositories like Google and Flickr, and bring back those images, and then the painting fool would kick in and turn them into a collage. It's not the most beautiful of pictures, I'll grant you that, but this collage was based on an article about the horrors of the war in Afghanistan. It goes far that back. And when you look at what the content of this collage is, it's really quite eye-opening and quite poignant. So down here we have an explosion next to a bomber plane. Up here in the center is a family with a baby, which is really kind of highlighting the juxtaposition of horror and family there. Up here is a girl in kind of situated headgear, kind of places it in the Afghan territory. And then I had to ask Anna what this is, because it's quite abstracted. And Anna went off to the original photograph and said, actually, that's a field of war graves from the south of France. And I thought, wow, you know, this is really... I've cherry-picked this, of course. Lots of the other collages weren't quite as poignant as this. But it's got, you know, explosions next to babies, next to tombstones. And so really was, in pictorial form, highlighting the misery and horror of Afghanistan. So one of my favorite pieces. And a magazine got interested in this, so we tried to make it look a little bit more aesthetically appealing by putting some paint strokes on there. And we got this picture out. The fifth project, which is perhaps the most well-known because the BBC covered this with their Horizon TV show, was the dancing salesman problem. For those of you with a computing background, you know about the traveling salesman problem. Well, basically this picture is produced as if each paint region on the image is a town in the traveling salesman problem, and you have to go from town to town without using as little petrol as possible. So I implemented the world's worst algorithm for doing this, and the big lines at the bottom are where it's driving really far from one town to another because it's a terrible algorithm. I used it to show that the computer art can be a third way. Normally computer art is kind of pretty fractals, abstract art, or Photoshop-style images turned into painterly renditions of them. Well, this is neither. This is not from photos, even though it's obviously figurative. None of the images, none of the people in the figure in the dance there were from a photograph. They were generated by a context-free grammar using somebody else's software and put together. So it's neither an abstract piece and kind of mathematical and fractal-like, nor is it from photographs. So I called it No Photos Harmed. And the irony was that it was printed on 300 small bits of photo paper and stuck as a collage on the image there. And we exhibited that in Paris, and it's been in a few exhibits since. Again, it's generative, so you can produce ones. And this is actually my preferred rendering on the different background with a different coloring there. Project number 6 was Technicolor Dream Chairs. This is one of the projects where the software surprised me. I called it this terrible name, Technicolor Dream Chairs, like Technicolor Dream Coat from the musical. And I really wanted lots of really colourful pictures of chairs out. I love the fact that this was actually a virtual painting of a virtual chair by a virtual artist, because that chair never exists either. It's a 3D model. And the painting tool can place these chairs in a scene. It can arrange a camera to move around that 3D scene, take a photograph where it's got good range of shadows, and then use that photograph in its painting process. And I gave it all the color palettes in the Painting Fool's Armory, and one of them is just grayscale. I had no idea I'd put a grayscale color palette in there. So I gave it the ability to invent its own painting styles as well. So I didn't explicitly tell it to use gray, and I didn't explicitly tell it to use this kind of melancholic ribbon-like painting style. It invented that by basically mashing together some other painting styles. And the output was really very nice and very surprising because I was expecting really colourful ones. I was interviewed by her own phrase is that she's a Chinese Opera Winfrey, Mrs. Yang Lang. She's a big star over in China. And she came all the way to Falmouth, the end of the earth, really, to interview me. And she was very interested in this piece and wanted to take it back to China. And she paid me for it there on the spot. £500 in £50 notes. It was the best day of my life, I have to say. And then she took it back to China, and she gave it to a well-known Chinese artist, and he gave some really good feedback, which I got translated, which has driven forward the Painting Fool project. I'm always looking for that kind of feedback from people across the spectrum of arts and sciences, of course. And a couple more from that series. That was the one on the right was what I was expecting, kind of cartoon-like, very colourful pictures. But the one on the left is what, in addition to the one on the right, I got. And I like this one because you can see the lighting. The Painting Fool has arranged these chairs. It's arranged lighting in a 3D scene. Then it's moved its camera around to get a decent spread of shadow, so you can really get a feeling of light in this space from the painting. This is number 7. I mentioned that my wife is Spanish. The model here is Blanca, my wife. This is before we were married. I wanted to show that the Painting Fool can do things which people can't do. So I arranged these virtual bits of paper with lots of crazy projective geometry to use to project onto it in such a way that you can only see the image from the front or the back, not from any of the sides. And I had this idea to actually print it out and make it. And I started, and I got like 3 sheets of paper together and realized it's impossible. So it only exists as a virtual sculpture. And I wanted to carry on, and the reason I'm now in Spain, I live in Spain, of course, is partly because of this Painting Fool project, because I came to live in Spain with Blanca. I wanted to do more things that people would have a hard time doing. So like painting 32 portraits with the same paint strokes. What does it even mean to paint 2 portraits with the same paint strokes? Well, it doesn't mean anything in physical reality, but it does when you do this kind of thing. There's Geraint Wiggins, who is an old colleague of ours. These are the participants at a dog stall meeting, and I've got an excerpt of the 32 paintings. That's Paul Brown, who's very well known in the computer art society field. And so basically I'm reusing all of the same paint strokes to paint lots of different portraits in this kind of Fauvist style. And again, people were criticizing me, saying, why on earth are you getting the painting tool to just do things which people can do, and people can do better, let's face it. And I thought after a while, yeah, you're right, maybe I should get the painting tool to do things which people can't actually do. And it would be very difficult for people to do that. The project number 8 is the concrete nudes. Very difficult to see, I guess, there, but these were one of my attempts at more kind of refined art, let's say. Not quite so flashy. Less important that the software is autonomously creative, and more important the kind of level of quality of the art. And I put this up there because it was one of the... so these are the painting tool first got into using text as an art material. And it basically picks out, if you can see the contours of the people there, you can't quite. But they're picked out basically by separating the words ever so slightly every time there's meant to be a contour. And you get these beautiful pieces from it. And that was my first foray, really, into getting into text generation. And then I got the software to produce... so we exhibited these in Paris, and we tried to get, follow the gallery tradition and bring it to the highest quality possible. That was on for a week in Paris at an exhibition. And it was my first foray into getting text generation. So, and I really wanted the text to mean something, so I started doing poetry. And now the painting tool can do poetry, and that led to more creative language projects, which ultimately led to the WIN project, and working with Pablo on text generation. And there's a few more pieces there, more beautiful. This is one of my favorites. This is called 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, because the portrait is picked out with those words repeated over and over again. Project number 9 was the first paid commission that the painting tool got, and it literally did get it. I was contacted by a Japanese guy running a company doing AI for legal purposes, and he was really, really keen on the painting tool project, and he wanted to commission it, not me, to paint some pictures for his new laboratory that he'd set up. So I dutifully took the money and developed more software for the painting tool, brand new projects. This was the Turing series. So for the first time, the painting tool was inventing its own style for a reason. With the chairs, it was just generating styles and seeing what happened. But here, it generates 10,000 painting styles, different, kind of halfway between pencils and pastels, halfway between a scribble and hashing. Lots and lots of different parameters it can change there. 10,000 of them applied to the same flower drawing, and then it used machine vision to analyze the flower drawing to tell it about the quality of the painting that it can produce with that painting style. And then when it analyzes the photograph to paint, it cherry picks the best painting style that it's seen in the 10,000 for that particular paint region. So when it looked at Turing's face, it chooses a different painting style for every little bit of colour in there. There aren't any colour photos of Turing, I should say, so it kind of had to work with black and white there. And so you get these really very, very different, really odd-looking styles coming out, and really exciting because you never know what you're going to get because the software is taking over so much more creative responsibility. Yeah, a bit of a close-up of the face there. Another example from that series was Good Day, Bad Day. This is a guy who was in charge of the commission. He's not the guy who commissioned it, but he was my liaison, Jacob. And I just loved the way the software picked out his hands there. It's one of my favorites. There's some dodgy-looking RGB graphics going on there as well, but also a new style. And you think to yourself, how would I program that style in? And I think there's no way I could work out what program to use, but the software did. And that's one of the beauties of AI, that the software can invent things that you couldn't do yourself. The 10th and last project, before I talk about the demo that's on show today, is the most recent. And like everyone in the world of AI, I've had to jump on the bandwagon of deep learning. And the deep learning applied to graphics is really remarkably good. And we're all wondering where our place is in the world now. But the painting tool is able to take... I programmed to be able to take some deep learning software. This is extraordinary, really. You train a neural network on building facades from Europe, in fact. And then it's a generative neural network, so it's able to generate new facades of buildings which don't exist. And it can do it to specification. So this is the old Hanoi series where I got the painting tool to do the easy bit, really, which is to generate a schema for all of this crazy-looking tower block, based on the towers of Hanoi Child's problem, where you've got circles of a different size. Each of the different apartment blocks there is of a different size. Each apartment is a different size. And then I got it to do some kind of blocky paintwork on it. Basically, the painting tool does this thing at the bottom, which is put together this schema. It passes this through this pre-trained neural network, which then generates the photorealistic picture at the top there. And then I threw in some trees with context-free design grammars again from an older project to make it look a bit more appealing. And then the painting tool took over and painted it up. So the painting tool is definitely in the deep learning era, even though we're both on catch-up, but don't want to be left behind, really, because there are some stunning graphics techniques coming out from deep learning. So the present, I'm continuing with deep learning. Pablo mentioned that I've done a lot of work in game design, and I should point out that Michael Cook is the one who's well known for automatically generating video games, but I've worked with him a lot, and what I want for the painting tool is for it to be a video game artist. I mean, what does it mean for software to take on the creative responsibility of video games? Well, it can create content, it can create style and mood. So what I've done here is another deep learning project using so-called style transfer. And it's amazing. You used to have to write an entire program to apply a style of someone like Picasso or Goya. I'm from Zaragoza now, so I should mention Goya. And you used to have, graphics guys would program this up for days or weeks. And now all you need to do is find one image of the target style and your content image, in this case a video game spaceship, and pass it through this neural network, and then you just stand back and wait. And you get this stunning application of that kind of fractal-like fiery image to the video game piece there. And I think I'm not a big fan of style transfer for kind of high-end art because it's basically pastiche. And it's not really very creative. But it's very, very useful for content generation in video games. And I have as another project this project called Ludando, which is was a commercial project with a business which is now recently folded. The idea is to have a social network for video games. So instead of sending a text message or a video or a picture, you send a video game. And so we've got this, I wrote this iPhone app with which you can design video games. So this is a game designed on the phone directly by choosing the nature of the terrain, the characters in it, how things fire, and so forth. And then what you can do is tell it to use a bit of wood to theme the content in there. This is done offline, I should point out. Unfortunately, I can't do it on the phone yet. And then you get this wood version of it. Exactly the same content, but with a wood image filter applied to it, which was machine learned with this deep learning technique. And you can almost feel the bits of wood knocking together. It's really a very, very easy and simple technique. And the idea is that in the long term, you'll be able to go around and you'll say, I really like this texture of these chairs in this auditorium, and I want my game to look like these chairs. You'll design your game on your phone, you'll take a photograph of the chair, and then you'll import it into the game. And you can do it for a particular artist if you do want pastiche. I like this guy called Gaith Abdul Ahad. He is a journalist, but he also does pen and ink drawings. And I just took one photograph of his and applied it, and you get this kind of pastiche of his style in the video game world. And again, really very nice project for the painting tool to get into, and I want the painting tool to take on creative responsibility for the look and feel of video games. It's a longer-term project. I'm calling it the present because it is ongoing, but it's really very much part of the future as well. The most recent painting tool project was done at my other university, so I'm employed at London and Australia to make things nice and easy. And what I did there was I used some other software which generates pieces of mathematics. The mathematics is down here. Not that you can see it, it's got lots of cosines, sines. It's very, very mathematical. And that generates the placement of about 300 shapes on an image. And they're done in such a way that you can use a plotter. There's an AxiDraw plotter that they have in Sensilab at Monash. And so I could use the images, turn them into plots, and then print them out. So these are actual physical versions, and I've got a couple with me in my bag, actually. The beauty of this was that the generative software was the world's least intelligent software. It took me about half an hour to write with my other math software, and I generated about 50,000 of these images at small size. I then passed them through a neural network called ImageNet, a pre-trained neural network, which was able to tag them with labels. And whenever it saw something that it thought was an object in its categorization of objects, there's 1,000 categories, it tagged one of the 50,000 with that. And I cherry-picked the ones which were the most highly tagged, 0.9 or above, which basically said that the software really thinks that they look like this object. And the one on the left there was tagged with the word crane, with a very high probability. And it does indeed look like a crane. And it made me realize that the word crane, in English at least, is for these giant construction machinery, but of course they get their name from the bird. And that looks like both the bird and the object. So I was really thrilled with that. And the one in the middle is Dragonfly, because of that insect thing on the left, and the software really thought that was a dragonfly. And the one on the right looks a bit like a sword being pulled from a scabbard, and so the software thought that was a scabbard. So I printed these out, I plotted these out. The Painting Fool has very rarely done physical projects, but this was one of them. And we got a little pop-up exhibition going for one night only at the Sensi Lab in Monash. So the demo that I've got is called You Can't Know My Mind. This goes back a few years, but it is still very much part of the present. And if you want to come and have your portrait done outside, please do so. You'll get something like this. And what's going on behind the scenes is the software, the Painting Fool, is reading the newspaper. It's reading The Guardian, and it's reading about good and bad news stories. And if it's in a really, really bad mood, it simulates a mood based on what it's reading. If it's in a bad mood, it will tell you to go away. So I apologize in advance if the software is in a bad mood, because you won't get your portrait. But it's often in a good enough mood to paint a portrait. And then it will say, thank you for being my model. It doesn't say, how would you like your portrait, sir or madam? It says, thank you for being my model. So you're quite clear from the get-go that you're its art material, it's not your tool. And so it asks you to hold a pose, and I dutifully do that. I don't have the green screen in the background, so I have to do a bit more face detection when I travel with this. And then it does some processing. It uses the mood that it's in to choose a couple of adjectives, and it uses those adjectives to choose painting styles, image filtering styles, and machine vision styles. It then, in its mind's eye, produces a very quick kind of Photoshop-y filtered version of what it wants to produce, and then it translates that into a painting process, and you have to wait while it paints the portrait. And then at the end, this is at 2 times the speed, I should point out. A hand appears on screen, and you'll see this in the demo, and it starts painting. This is twice as fast as it normally goes. I've speeded up the video. And it keeps painting and painting and painting. And you realize that, actually, where am I? Because you're only part of the art material. It's really much more interesting in the background. The background is a bit of evolutionary art, a bit of generative art, an abstract piece, which has been chosen specifically to meet its... To suit its mood and these adjectives, and then it applies your face to the foreground and the image to the background, and then applies an image filter to both. The image filter has been chosen according to its mood as well, to hopefully achieve some look. And then you realize soon enough that it's beginning to pick out you. There's a bit of a face emerging there. And then it puts in the contours. It's done a bit of edge detection, and you hopefully see a portrait which looks at least a little bit like you. But then you realize that it's not about you getting a portrait. It's about the software learning to be better at expressing its mood. Because behind the scenes is a machine learning process which is now using machine vision to see whether it's achieved what it wants to achieve. And if it has, it will record that as a success. If it hasn't, it will record that as a failure. And it learns from that to be better at choosing its art styles in the future. So please do come along and have your portrait done. That's possibility. And this is what it says at the end. You get this PDF, which you can print out. I have a printer. Who knows whether it will work, but if we're lucky, we'll get a printout. At the top, it tells you what kind of mood it was in. I was in an experimental mood. That's one of its moods. I wanted to achieve a glazed portrait. I aimed to achieve something like that. That was its mind's eye conception, a Photoshop-filtered version of it. But it has to use these crazy art materials of painting and so forth. And that's what it's achieved. And then it checks one against the other. Has it achieved what it wants to achieve? And it's quite a glazed portrait, but it's lowered the level of glaze there. So that's recorded as a failure, sadly. And that will be used in a machine learning approach to improve its processing later. Here's another guy. This was exhibited in Paris. This guy just rocked up from the street, gave his initials as GH, and then left. I've no idea who he was, but he was a guy from the street. The software was in a negative mood. It wanted to produce a blurry portrait, so it applied the image filter and the painting style like that. It wanted to achieve that. That's what it got. And he said, yeah, this is a very blurry portrait. So he's pretty happy about that. And then it does a bit of showboating, and it says, oh, and it's also a bit bleached, which suits its mood. So we've got bleached, blurry, dull, drab. When it's in a bad mood, it uses those adjectives. And it does achieve painting styles which kind of express that mood. And there we are, and you can see up close up, it's a nice painting. And we did an exhibit of this for 5 days and one very scary night with alcohol in the Science Museum in London. We did about 300 portraits, mostly of children, and it cost about £150 in ink. And last slide, so the big thing for the Painting Fall is it is already possibly the world's first virtual artist in residence, maybe not, but it is an artist in residence at Kubrick. That's the Cardiff University Brain Research Imaging Centre. This is a neuroscience imaging centre, and the guy who runs that does visualizations of brains, and he exhibits them in art exhibitions for public engagement around science. And he got to know me through an exhibit we were both at, and it took a long time, but he's now finally found some money from the Wellcome Trust to pay for the Painting Fall to be an artist in residence there, and I'm going to do a different project every month. The first project was dream collages. People supplied text about their dream they had, and the software produces a collage to match that dream. And the next project, one of the next projects, will be using the WIM project to suggest surrealist art. What if there was a dolphin made of gold? And I'm going to try and visualize that with the Painting Fall. Okay, thanks for your time. Please do come and see the demo. I'd love to see if the Painting Fall will paint your portrait for you. Thank you.